this is all still being sorted out, but I think ultimately they're going to say we prefer you to get the same vaccine if you had Pfizer or Moderna, but we're going to, whatever is convenient for you, we're going to allow you to get that booster shot. If you have access, if you had access to Pfizer before, but you have access to Moderna now, that's fine. I think where it probably has the most significance is people had Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It was a single shot. It's a different kind of vaccine, and it hasn't produced the same degree of protection as the mRNA vaccines. I think there's some evidence that you might even be better off if you got a different, like the mRNA vaccine following a Johnson & Johnson. So they've looked at the data, they've come to that conclusion. It makes a whole lot of sense to me, and I think it ought to simplify things for folks. Every community doesn't have access to all the same capabilities at the same time, so it makes it easier for people, I think.
And as far as say the Johnson & Johnson, so if people were to get Pfizer and then they would get a Pfizer booster shot, that's what the recommendation is. So those mRNA, you shouldn't.
They're similar vaccines.
Okay.
So Pfizer still has some real additional cold storage issues, and not everybody is capable of carrying it. If you had a Pfizer and your local pharmacy carries Moderna, it's fine. Okay. And vice versa. If you had a Moderna and you happen to go to a pharmacy that only has Pfizer at the moment, that's fine. Okay. So I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah. So now it's mainly just about what is available to people, and that's why they're suggesting this. Is not really anything about the science of the vaccines, just more about.
Well, we've known for quite a while now that the science was behind mixing and matching doses. These vaccines produce antibodies in different ways, and there's nothing to say that perhaps this other way might provide additional protection, and so it isn't surprising that they would look at the science and come to this conclusion. I think it makes sense to me. And we are talking at this point about booster shots, mm-hmm. which are, for specific groups, depending on which vaccine you got. For example, if you got a Moderna, it's not being recommended for all adults, but if you got Johnson & Johnson, it is being recommended for all adults. So helpful to know what your initial vaccine was, mm-hmm. and then which category you're in going forward.
Do you think that will eventually change, that everyone who's gotten a shot will eventually need a booster, or how are we looking in terms of that?
Yeah, I think we're probably heading in that direction. It does look like the antibody protection wanes over time, and that's obviously the most significant for people who are already at high risk. So if you're 80 years old, have underlying conditions, that loss of protection over time may be really significant for you. If you're young and healthy, it may be less so. So we're kind of starting in a triage fashion, the way we did when we rolled out the vaccines in the first place. Mm-hmm. The highest risk people, based on the science, should be first in line to get the boosters. And then eventually, I think, well, the other thing that's going to happen is more and more time will go by. So the elderly and those at risk were the first to get vaccines, and their immunity is waning more so than those that were 2 months or 3 months behind them. So there's lots of reasons why I think it makes sense to do this strategy.
Right. And, now that we're looking at a year from now, from the holidays, things were completely different. Gatherings were smaller and people weren't gathering as much. And when we were looking back at just case counts of COVID, every time that there was, 2 weeks later, when there was a holiday, there was huge case increases, and now we're not really looking at that. Do you think that might happen again, or with the vaccines, is that something that may be less?
Well, the number of people in our communities who are susceptible to getting COVID is less. And it's either less because the community got lots of vaccines in arms and there just are fewer people who are susceptible that way, or unfortunately, some communities had a lot of COVID and they've developed some natural immunity. So at this point, either because you've been vaccinated or you had the disease, there's a smaller pool of individuals who can spread COVID, mostly among themselves. And so the numbers are going to come down over time with, with antibodies being reduced. We don't know for sure, but my crystal ball tells me that things are going to steadily tend to get better, even though we do have some holidays coming up, and even though people in cold climates are going to be coming indoors in contact with each other. I'm hopeful that we will continue to see a plateau or a downward trend.
Yes, I hope so too. I mean, I think we're all hoping that, but it makes logical sense. More people are vaccinated, so there's less people who can. But with breakthrough cases, I don't really know and how rare. I know they're considered rare, but is that maybe something we could see as more people getting breakthrough cases?
Yeah, no, unfortunately they're not terribly rare. I mean, we were hoping they'd be rare, but once we see how the disease behaves and what the Delta variant is capable of, there is a certain percentage of people who will get COVID even though they've been vaccinated. We're certainly hoping that with the booster doses, that number will be greatly reduced. That's part of what we're trying to see. It looks as if people with breakthrough cases are infectious for a shorter period of time and ultimately are less likely to transmit COVID than people that get the natural disease. But it is still a possibility, and it's still one of the factors we're going to have to continue to evaluate going forward.
Okay, I just have one more question. If I haven't gotten vaccinated yet, I'm still on the fence, and I see people messaging each other on Facebook saying, well, I got the vaccine and I still got COVID, and they're like, well, why would I get vaccinated if I could still get COVID? What would you say to someone like that?
It's not a black and white world. COVID is not just one thing. COVID can be a horrible disease which can end up impairing you for life or killing you for some people, and COVID might be like a common cold for somebody else. Breakthrough cases are much more likely to be mild. They're more likely to be less infectious to others. You're certainly less likely to be hospitalized and to die. So yeah, you might get COVID, but for you, the COVID might be like a cold. For somebody unvaccinated, the COVID might be a terminal event. And the same thing is true for some of the side effects. We do know that vaccines will rarely cause blood clots. They will sometimes cause a mild case of myocarditis. We know that natural COVID has a huge number of people who get serious, life-threatening blood clots, and some people will get serious, long-lasting myocarditis. So these are false equivalents. Anything can happen, but you have to step back, look at the data, and ultimately, I think, trust the people who are interpreting the data to make those sorts of decisions. But if you're looking for some little crack in the armor from the vaccine, you're going to find it.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
All right. Take care.
Have a good one. You as well. Bye.